Welcome to my front room. My name is Hussein Husseini. I'm the host of the Programmatic Society, a show created by Michel Givillier and produced by the Societies.media. Today we have some lovely guests, the Chief Economist Daniel Knapp of the IAB Europe, and Julie Selman, the SVP, Head of EMEA for Magnite. And we're going to talk about the outlook of 2022 in our industry in terms of targeting, identity, new formats, and many things more. I hope you will join us in this hot discussion and that you will be entertained and educated. Thanks again for making it that far out. Julie just said, it's like, I don't know where you are. And trust me, the first guest here a couple of weeks ago said the same thing, because it's very quiet. And today we're here to talk about the outlook of our industry, in context to targeting, identity. And the topic list is quite long from my perspective. And you just educated me a few things, which I probably forgot in my briefing, but which we're gonna address today as well. But yeah, let's just go straight into it. Out of 2022, I mean, if you look at the past couple of years, pandemic, GDPR, everything all together, where do you think, our industry is headed? I mean, it's like now all of a sudden everybody wants to be good. It doesn't mean we weren't good before, but like everybody wants to be more, they want to do better decisions how we advertise, data-driven like. What is your take on that? Where are we headed in the industry? You can have a buy-side perspective, a general perspective, or a sell-side perspective. I leave that to you guys. Julie?
So I think for me, the key themes, and I think for Magnite as well, and generally for the industry, and I'm sure I'm missing some, are obviously privacy, GDPR, and what comes with that. So, the way we target our consumers, it's changing because the law is changing, because the tech is changing. So there's everything around that. And then sustainability, we spoke about it earlier. I think it's becoming more and more important. I think, we've been talking about SPO for years, but sort of sustainability as part of your SPO strategy, so not just for transparency or better understanding your investment, but also thinking about the environmental impact. It's going to be really, really important in the next couple of years for everyone across the supply chain. And then more from my role, CTV obviously is huge. Connected TV, like any TV, we saw yesterday the announcement Netflix is changing their business models potentially. And so this is a massive growth area as well.
Which you all expected for some time now, when that announcement is
there's been rumors for some time, and there's, various companies doing, hybrid models already, like Discovery, and Amazon is going this way. So it's been suspected, but I think Netflix actually going that route is going to be a game changer.
You're going to think they're going to do advertising like the traditional way in CTV, or there are solutions where you are able to flag in advertising into the content, because most of the time they're the content owner, right? They can do what they want from a product. I mean, the opportunities are crazy in terms of that, but that's going to be massive. I agree. What's your take, Daniel?
I think where we are right now is a state of flux. It's I call it the long year zero. And the analogy that I always use is the year 46 before Christ, when the Romans switched the calendar. I think the day had 400 something days, the longest day, the longest year in history, in recorded history. We are in this long year zero in advertising because we don't know yet when this year ends. And it's clear that this year zero is longer than 365 days. It started already in 2020. And I think it's going to move on at least until the deprecation of third-party cookies is final, and it has actually happened. So in this long state of flux, many things are happening. We see many moving parts. We see the entire paradigm of targeting, measurement, and attribution changing. We see the infrastructure of programmatic being entirely re-architected. We had this, as typical for any emergent industry, this growth without a master plan. We had protocols, OpenRTB, but we had business models that were mushrooming. We had cottage industry after cottage industry, layers after layers in this massive layer cake of programmatic. The roles of the players and also what functions are required. This is all changing. At the same time, we're seeing that this notion of the open internet that we had is increasingly a fata morgana, I would say.
Fata morgana, that's I haven't heard that for a long time.
It's a mirage at the horizon because, increasingly we are seeing a splinter, a fragmentation of the internet into walled gardens, hedged gardens, fully closed, semi-closed gardens, fueled, of course, by the deprecation of third-party cookies, Apple's ATT, and other things where to ensure that there's first-party data and to combine ad exposure and conversion into a single environment, it needs to be fairly closed. So we see this with social commerce, we see this but also with the rise of retail media in particular, and other things. So everything in the foundation of the industries, the floors of the industry are shifting. But we don't yet know how the future is exactly going to look like. We know the growth areas, but we're going to talk about this in a second. Is the future going to be IDs? Is it going to be other first-party data? Is it going to be topics? All of that stuff. It's going to be a combination of all of that. But what the exact recipe and mix is, and which solutions actually work at what scale, this is all open. So we are at, in a sense, in a phase of live experimentation. And this long year zero will only be over when this experimentation is complete.
Did we ever know what the recipe is, to be honest? I mean, if you look at the past, we're long enough into this industry that we know we have done things a certain way because we adapted them because they were partially done in the US. We thought it's the right thing to do. Did we ever target right? Did we ever use data right? I mean, now the third-party cookie is dying because some other people got involved, which is law enforcement, right? They made a decision. If you think about GDPR, I remember just a couple of weeks before GDPR, it's like programmatic is dead. And now we grew 70% year on year in programmatic, and it's still not stopping. CTV is the next opportunity. You're right. It's which we still treat as a channel is, from my perspective, still not part of an omni-channel perspective, which I hope, because I think it was the key asset that's missing. I remember the times where I was fighting with TV planners, discussing GRPs and impressions. I know to the fact that you mentioned that measurement is changing now as well. But do we have the right recipe now? If we don't know it, did we know the right recipe before, or as you just said rightly, are we now more willing to risk and do what we should have done from the beginning? Experiment more, try more things out, because there's not a blueprint in our business.
There was never anything perfect, but we had a paradigm that people agreed upon, believed in to some extent, some more, some less, but it was a paradigm. And what's changing now is that we don't have a replacement for that. So everyone is in a soul-searching mode, and those who are, I think, ahead of the pack are really experimenting and testing how these different solutions work, standalone, and also in conjunction as an orchestra together.
Do you agree? I mean, soul searching means, what I see in the industry, and maybe you disagree, is we are dragging a hole in one part of our business and they try to plumb it with something else. Could be contextual, identity solutions, and now, you mentioned sustainability comes into place. Now we want to go forward with good perspectives, but are we changing the strategy or how we execute campaigns? Anyway, it's like, if your planning methodology, we try to do omni-channel. Do we do really omni-channel today? I mean, what's your perspective? I still think we're running. I mean, you have a different. You're from a technology company, but from an execution perspective, do we run this omni-channel perspective already, or do we do still channel-based? If we look at the funnel overall, just and the third-party cookie is dying, are we going to target right? Everybody talks about first-party data, how important that is. We always knew how important first-party data is, right? And I'm not going to blame the walled gardens screwing that over 14 years ago when they, basically didn't incentivize the search part of the business for our industry, where everybody cut down on search and SEO, where we didn't generate any first-party data. But are we doing this right? I mean, if you say there's no blueprint, what's the blueprint of the future then? I mean, if it's not there yet, we are now on the pace of not having enough talent, not enough experienced people, and where do you find those people who are going to manage this in the future? A lot of questions.
A lot of questions in one.
In one, but you can speak freely, please.
So I think, and I'm sure Daniel will say it much more eloquently than me, but I think what we have to look at from, ultimately we look at what is the advertiser's goal and what is the outcome they're looking for. And then everything in the middle needs to kind of...
But do they know the outcome? I mean, it's like
so the outcome should be generally sales or some sort of, revenue or service.
Always should have been, right?
That's the ultimate outcome. And then I think over the last years, obviously with this sort of hyper-targeting that we could do, there was success there. Obviously, why you could charge a higher CPM if you have a better idea who the user is. Now that's becoming problematic because we have a different way of understanding who is this consumer, what are their likes. Yeah. So that's where we need to start, I think, looking. And then you start looking, okay, so how can we fill that gap? There's different ways you can do it. There's first-party data, super important, but it's only maybe 20% of the internet that will cover that sort of part where you can reach those people. I would encourage definitely publishers to...
You're very optimistic, 20%.
Maximum 20%, maybe it's 5%, I don't know, but it's a small percentage. It's not huge scale, and each publisher, and obviously, I speak from a publisher point of view because that's our business. Each publisher will have, their strategies on collecting that data, but it's not very easy, and it's never going to scale to the extent of, the way we can do it now across a browser, for example. Yeah. Then you have, the sort of the clean rooms, the audience data matching services. That's very accurate, can be scaled maybe across multiple publishers, and you can use first-party data from the advertiser. So that's something interesting. But again, it's not huge scale. Then you have, Google and their topics, for example, which will be huge scale but not very accurate. And and at Magnite, for example, we really believe in bringing the power to the sellers. So really giving the publishers the tools to create these first-party data segments, and then work with other publishers together to create larger segments, and then create sort of IDs that you can target. But it's never going to be the way it was before. It's just how can we kind of, within those different ways of trying to understand who the consumer is, trying to then get those outcomes that the advertiser requires. I think that's the way you should look at it, not sort of, well, we're going to fill the gap and, did it even ever work? Ultimately, the money will go, we'll see it stream where we see the outcomes.
No, I mean, you're right not to look at it at that perspective, but we'll need a huge mind shift change. Right?
Yes.
So, and
that's why we have many, many conferences to discuss, and it's not strange that Google keeps postponing, obviously, because they haven't figured it out yet, and it's a very large company with very smart people, and there's I think 80 ID solutions at the moment in the market or more. There is a multitude of clean rooms. There's all kinds of ways to collect first-party data. It's just, it will be a mix of things. And there is no blueprint. We're creating the blueprint. Yeah. And we will have to see in the next coming years. Hopefully this year zero will then...
Finally end.
You want it to end. And I don't think it's going to end because, there are solutions popping out like mushrooms everywhere. And everybody's claiming, in marketing, everybody's claiming they have the best solution.
I think this is the stage of the market right now. Solutions are popping up because we are in the idea generation and in the idea execution stage, but we're not in the consolidation stage. So new ideas come up, are being tested in the market, and then it's being seen. Do they work? Do they scale? Do companies need to work closer together? Does there need to be M&A activity? So this whole mushrooming will at some point again consolidate as typical in our industry.
Yes, I just got remembered to 2015 where we talked about the consolidation of the industry.
Yeah. But Julia's right. I mean, what really matters is that the advertiser drives outcomes. And we in our industry, we speak in our acronyms, we speak in our expert secret language. And I think that sometimes obscures our view on what value we can really deliver to the advertisers. Our conferences are often too insular, our discussions are too insular. We need to fill that stuff in the middle. Advertising is, that's what's coming out for me right now, is the paradox thing is, now that we're becoming more data-driven, we realize that data isn't replacing the art. Advertising, maybe performance marketing is different, but advertising overall isn't a science. It is data-enabled craft. And we're seeing this now with this broad array of different solutions. We need to test them, we need to tinker, we need to experiment. We need people actually then to make decisions on which combination of these things we use to create a recipe, from the clean room first party stuff that Julie mentioned to the contextual stuff on the other. It's all on a spectrum and we need to bring it together. It will vary by client, by campaign type, but it makes things more difficult. And as you said, it requires new talent on other types of talent as well, because you don't need to optimize just for creative or for supply path, time of day. Now you need to bring something additional in the equation, which is which targeting method, cohorts, one-on-one data, works in which environments, for which creators, on which platforms. Mind-blowing.
Well, and to add to that, I think you also, from a publisher perspective, they, again, we have a lot of acronyms and, ad tech is very important for them, but ultimately the publisher is working to either inform or entertain their consumer. So the advertiser is going after the consumer. The publisher has the sort of the mandate to entertain or inform their consumer in a way that is safe, privacy safe, user experience is optimized. So these things need to come together as well. So I feel like we often forget that there's a consumer at the end, and they were sort of complaining like, oh, privacy, or all these GDPR, and there's a reason for it, right? And it's a fine balance to find, I think, between the advertiser, the publisher, and the consumer, and that's why we're in the position where we are now, because clearly there was something not right.
Well, we always try to be consumer-centric, and now with you mentioning data-driven marketing, there's so many layers, from that planning that ad impression to buying that ad impression and reaching the right audience. But nobody talks about creativity. I mean, is that the kind of experimentation you mean? Like if you look at solutions in the conversational ad space and audio, CTV. I mean, CTV, when I heard about the first agency hubs that only run CTV, it reminded me to the first trading desk we had 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah, or mobile teams.
Oh, mobile teams, right? And everybody exploring that. Are we doing the same mistakes we've done 12 years ago, or are we better now? Because now, you mentioned the consumer. I think we're missing one aspect. It's like if you have 80 identity solutions, the DPA, is the DPA trusting us in terms of if there are 80, if there are 100, if there are 200 solutions, is it going to make it harder for us in terms of privacy? Because, anybody can say, yeah, you privacy conform, you're compatible, that's fine. But somebody will always ask the questions, are they really? And then, GDPR came, but GDPR was planned for longer than expected.
I think as an industry, we're much further advanced right now, where in the past we were slightly reactive to privacy trends.
Yeah, very reactive.
But I think we're now proactive. We can, it's a false dichotomy to say that privacy and targeted ads don't go together. Many people who attack the industry make this argument, talk about surveillance ads and that kind of stuff, which is just PR language. If you really read the books on surveillance, the situation is very different. But the point I'm making is, when you look at new techniques, machine learning techniques, concepts like differential privacy, academic concepts from the 90s, from the 80s sometimes, which are now being put into smart systems at scale for the first time, These are approaches that really combine social concerns, legitimate concerns, and the ability for businesses to address their consumers. And what I'm wishing for is a more constructive relationship between regulators and the industry beyond regulation, before the fact or after the fact, to figure out how can we design together how a future looks like that allows us to use data for personalization reasons, but also to protect privacy. And I don't think this is just about the ad industry, because we as an industry are, with the ads we're showing, consumers are feeling or having a privacy experience with us. In other industries, it's far more removed. Think of banking, credit scoring, and all that kind of stuff. People don't see it, so they don't think about it. But the harm, the actual harm produced,
I just thought
is
about
actually
my credit score.
much bigger. Right? Look at it, the harm produced is much bigger. In advertising, it's edge cases. So if we get this right with the new approaches, and I think we have some really, really good concepts in our industry, it could be a template for how other industries, from the automotive to, I don't know, even the steel industry or any other industry, tries to bridge this divide between privacy on the one hand and personalization on the other.
Yeah, and I agree, not so much on the last, I agree on the last part, but in terms of being able to target, it's not necessarily a bad thing. We know from research that consumers like to see ads that are relevant to them, and it makes them, more inclined to act upon it, buy it, or use the service. So it's not always a bad thing. We just need to make sure that it's in a privacy safe way. And I remember I was once in Sweden. I think you did a nice talk about sort of news and information is the open sort of the opposition to fake news is really much at stake because of these rules, because these smaller newspapers who find it very hard to fund journalism are struggling in Europe, and this affects then small medium businesses because they can't really, they have small budgets, so they can't really do a massive campaign across the whole of Belgium. Yeah. They need to be more specific, and so there's a lot at stake, I think, if you remove complete sort of any type of targeting. And it's not necessarily in the benefit for the benefit of the user either. So there is this balance to find.
Balance is a good point, because there are different voices about that. Like if you think about topics and Google, it's like, well, we need to go away from this one-to-one to one-to-many. The balance would be one-to-some. And then you look at if you look at other channels like social, personalization is still, like all the walled gardens try to keep that personal experience as much as possible. So with all the decisions that have been made, with Google, with Apple, they're playing this to their own advantage, right? Or what do you think?
There's always, there are many aspects to it. One, I genuinely believe that the majority of players have good intention to be on the right side of history. But sometimes what they're doing is being entangled in broader concerns about antitrust, and also at least has knock-on effects in terms of quasi-regulation. As regulators struggle to enforce things, struggle to come up with a vision together with the industry, but then if you have a browser, if you're on an operating system, you can act as a quasi-gatekeeper by enforcing platform policy which everybody must adhere to. And if this isn't done in dialogue with the industry, it's potentially problematic.
Well, it is. Julie, I don't know if you've been, before GDPR came, I think you and me were regularly in Belgium, and that topic was not very well understood. Like, what do we need a cookie for? And then, it was always the feeling you had said, like, do you want to understand this, or you do really care only about your voters, right? So it's always many interests, like in our industry, right? It's like, how do we use that media budget to actually achieve outcomes that a CFO understands?
Well, that's definitely a problem, I think, generally in our industry. It's very complex. You see similar things in the finance industry, world. The topics are so complex that it's very hard for the regulator to really, really understand. And then they might, either ban something or go, I don't know, forbid something, or which we wouldn't necessarily agree with because we think it's misunderstood. And maybe other things that a larger company would get away with because it's again misunderstood, or there's something. It's so complex that it's hard for lawmakers, I think, to sometimes really understand. And again, if you have 80 identity solutions and then you have 80 SSPs and 80 DSPs, and everyone is slightly different in terms of how they approach all these new changes. It's very, very difficult.
Now go ahead.
And
you want to say something?
There's, I think, one interesting thing. I'm just in my mind walking back through the Mexico stalls of the last 10 years. I think one problem that the industry has done is it has, at least in its early days, hugely oversold its capabilities. It was quoted in Ad Age, Adweek, and all these different journals. And then regulators started to believe that this science fiction is actually what's going on. Had the industry been more honest about its capabilities in the early days of programmatic, regulators might not think about its practices as they do now.
That's definitely one view. I agree, but I work on the agency side myself. It's like you only repeat or you only push what you know, right? And there was a lot of knowledge that was not existent. We talked about this RTB ecosystem where you buy the open web, with audiences. Some people knew there was not enough inventory. Everybody who worked on the tech side knew there was not enough data or data that was validated and where the taxonomies actually worked. But beyond that, and that's within the ecosystem of the executional part, which is the agencies. And even the publishers kicked me out the first year I went to talk to them about programmatic. A year later, they said, please come, sit, my friend, let's do a deal. And
like you said in one of your many questions that you asked at the beginning, talent and education is so important, and it's really hard also because it's so complex. So it's hard to be an expert across everything. It's hard to train people on one thing, but then you need to understand the larger ecosystem. Like you said, if you work in an agency, you wouldn't necessarily see the side of the publisher or the SSP or the DSP, and there's lots of other companies in between there. You have the contextuals, the attribution. So there is a lot at stake, and it's really comes down to education, I think, but it's almost impossible, really.
I'm not saying that we owe it, but we come from a time where education is the main thing to succeed in our industry. Now, let's take into account culture, right? You have all these kids who, after in the pandemic, quit their jobs, who don't want to go in our industry anymore. I just heard yesterday from my American partner, there's 5 jobs in the States on one person. So they can choose what they want, right? They go in, oh, that person was mean to me. Oh, I don't get it. I leave, I go to the next job. Are we so desperate? I mean, at some point, we say we need people to make experiments who have never served an ad in their life before. How can we ensure from an exponential graph of our industry to push our talent in that direction? It's a very difficult question.
I think, so this is something we talk a lot about at Magnite at the moment, because we're back at the office, but we have flexibility. And how do we...
You guys are back now?
3 days a week.
Oh. Okay.
And how do we get people excited about coming to the office? And, I'm absolutely not one to police if somebody comes to the office, or, I wanted to make such an environment where you want to go. Yes. And I think one thing is, respect, not calling them kids because they're adults. And empathy and understanding everyone's situation. It is very different. We have people who started work, they finished, they graduated during the pandemic, so they've never actually been to an office. So even, getting a badge and, tapping in is like new to them. They've never really done that. They did an interview over Zoom or, Google Meet or whatever, and then all of a sudden they have to sit in an office. So it's very, very different. And all the sort of, ad tech perks that we used to think were very cool, 15 years ago, beanbags and ping pong tables, that's not going to cut it anymore.
No.
And so I think a lot of, we need to look at them as adults, respect them, have empathy, and try to make them understand all the great possibilities of working in this fascinating industry, which like you said, changes every 10 years. I don't think we were wrong 10 years ago. It's just we evolve constantly, which is super exciting about this industry.
Yeah, I agree with you. We weren't wrong, we just didn't know better, right?
I think this constant change can be intellectually really, really stimulating, but this needs career plans, forums for people that can meet and share this excitement. If you're just scrubbing campaigns in front of your PC in the office, that spark isn't going to fly over.
Yeah.
So how we work, how we share knowledge in the industry, also how we organize our teams, it needs to change. And one thing wouldn't apply for everybody, but back to the point of the ID solutions contextual, there's so much siloed expertise. And I think what will make people much more excited about the industry is a better understanding of how their silo, how this deep expertise that they contribute, how it fits into the bigger whole. Break that out, have some kind of horizontal layer above it, let knowledge flow. I think is very important for people to realize that this is a really exciting industry where creative minds are required, analytical minds are required, where you can be, with your knowledge, flexible enough to switch to a new solution, to a new paradigm that's going to emerge quite quickly, and that your job is not going to be the same as it was a year ago.
Yeah, so I guess we need to be able to share knowledge at some point, right? Because there was a time where everybody was working in silos. We have to still in big companies where everybody's just, okay, this is what I know. I don't have the confidence to go beyond that.
Well, and the pandemic, in a way, made it less hierarchical in a way, but also harder to get out of your silo. Because before you would, maybe run into someone or you would join a meeting, whereas, during the pandemic, you're sitting at home and you just have your schedule of meetings, and in between you're, doing your work or you're doing something else, but you're not, randomly meeting a person that can teach you a little bit on the demand side or the supply side or the DSP team or whatever people are working on, at least in our office, or the finance team. I don't know, anything. And especially what I always really liked about working in this industry, and if I look at my network, is people move around a lot, but also change really their roles. And they have deep expertise on one side, and then they move to completely the other side, and then they develop the expertise there, and that's so exciting about it. So again, what we're trying to do in the office is invite industry experts to come and share some information. We do, weekly sort of stand-ups where everyone says kind of what they're working on, because during the pandemic, this was not possible, and it was really hard to kind of have that information flow, which is really difficult.
Where's my invitation? No.
It'll come.
I'm not an expert.
We went back to the office 2 weeks ago, so it's early days. But things like that, I think, will be really instrumental in getting younger people who haven't had the many years of experience like us in various companies in this industry to really get a good taste of why it's so interesting and why it's so amazing to have an actual career rather than, okay, I do 2 years at an agency and then I'm gonna do something else because I'm burnt out.
So you sit on the board of the IB. You're the chief economist. Are you guys going to consider to bring in where the IB can definitely impact as well, to bring young people, young groups together to share their knowledge from different verticals and companies? Because usually it's always experts that sit together, experts like us, discussing the topic, the future of how to target or building blueprints, possible blueprints, how the industry should work. But it's like in my conversations with young people, it's like, oh, I've never thought about this that way. They have different angles of solving things. Where we just come from a very two-dimensional perspective of programmatic and more three-dimensional. They come from a completely different hyper area.
We work a lot with Bricks and Finishing School to get grads. They do kind of a little program on sort of every side of the advertising industry, from creative to tech kind of, and everything in between. We try to hire people through there. We work with Bloom. We try to work with these kind of networks where you have people from kind of slightly different backgrounds, but who could easily pivot into the industry. From an IAB perspective, I know IAB UK, for example, comes and they'll do talks about different topics in our office. So yeah.
We do something similar with IAB Europe. We have a new training program that is geared towards starters, that debunks terms to kind of reduce the entry barriers into this very kind of acronym-ridden industry. We at conferences, invite younger speakers, outside perspectives. In particular, I think programmatic is also a generation. I mean, I think there's a programmatic cohort. If you look at programmatic conferences, it's a group of people that made their career in the, I would say, 2010s, right? Somehow. Whereas the young generation, and you see it in some conferences, have entirely different conversations. They think about TikTok, they think about other channels. With these other channels comes other problem solving. If we speak about programmatic, an ignition of those perspectives, I think is going to be very helpful to break up our own thinking.
I think also programmatic is almost like a redundant word now. It's digital advertising. This is a bit like connected TV. It's a TV that's now most TVs, I think all TVs are now digital TVs. If you buy a new TV, you're not going to get an old analog TV probably. So I think, again, and I really like that idea of sort of getting younger speakers. We get a lot of speaking opportunities. We always push forward young people, women, different ethnicities, like trying to make it diverse, because that's also something that younger people really look at when they're looking at an employer or at an industry. Like, is this, an industry I want to be working in? Again, sustainability is so important to be, thinking about that, to have a clear strategy around that for as much as, obviously, the environment and your company as such, your investors, your shareholders, everything, but also employees and, recruiting and retention. It's really, really important.
Retention is a very interesting topic right now. I think, as I said, people basically running. The news says people are running away, but
but I think that's also a bit human nature. I mean, we've been sort of stuck at home for a couple of years, then all of a sudden you have to either come back to the office or never go back, and it might not fit with what you actually wanted and how your life was before, and people want change.
I was traveling through the pandemic, strangely, but it was possible. But if you look at these, if we try to excite these young kids, graduates, and I really agree with you in terms of we need to get earlier in the process to fish them, basically, get them in and excite them right straight off uni, and prepare them for an industry where knowledge and confidence play hand in hand. I think with the pandemic, we gave a confidence boost to people who usually don't have a voice, but were confident of speaking to a screen. Who actually do the work all the time, or operational, who never get a voice all of a sudden, and they are now forefront, which from my perspective gives a huge push of talent, which is very hard though to get to hire, because they do what they want to do. They can choose what they want to do. Do you think, like, now if I think about I don't know where Magnite is, and that I should have looked it up. It's like if you look at in-game advertising right now, like everybody's like, that's the new thing, in terms of branding. I'm not sure about performance, having video games and then seeing the ads there. It's like, do you think, Vodafone, Mercedes, all these big brands, they have their, in-game, teams now focusing on this sector, where, we fill stadiums with up to 40,000 people just joining these events. In terms of advertising, is that the new opportunity, take into account that a gamer spends 2.5 hours a day playing a game, where we just, when we talk about, attention and advertising, which takes 1 to 2 seconds.
I don't have any real statistic or, information on this. I just know I have 3 children, 2 boys, 9 and 7, who love to play Fortnite. And, buying a Nike hoodie on your Fortnite, player, that's something that's real. Like, they would love that. So, yeah, for sure, I think, those stadiums filled with people and those tournaments is huge, I'm sure. I think there's a lot of opportunity there in the sort of the metaverse, for various companies doing all kinds of ways of, creating their own worlds, creating their own brands, their own merge. I don't know. And you probably know more about it than I do, but it seems like a huge opportunity.
It's a good topic because, you know, you said a couple of minutes before we oversold our industry, metaverse. I mean,
yeah, I think gaming in a sense is like the waiting room to the metaverse,
Yeah.
apart from being a very big opportunity of its own right now. I think you're right, gaming was undersold because it was associated with a very, very narrow demographic, male, young. But what became clear, in particular during the pandemic, is that the real statistics are different. Girls, boys, men, women, they all play games. It's a broad mass audience. And I think the remarkable moment for me came a couple of years ago when I was watching some Twitch streams and I saw that the advertiser wasn't Asus anymore. It was an FMCG brand. When they realized it's a forum for mass audiences. And now, of course, games have changed. We have massive innovation there. Think of the Unreal Engine, which was used for the Star Wars movies. So amazingly crisp rendering, which of course for the quality of in-game ads is phenomenal. We have changes in the infrastructure of in-game ad targeting. You can think of the recent Microsoft / Xandr announcement to have a kind of cross-platform, real kind of gaming walled garden. If we think about how easy it is without expensive hardware to have access to games, to cloud gaming and all of these things. So an audience draw, an infrastructure play, amazingly crisp graphics, all these things are coming together. At the same time, I think in-game advertising is only one component of game advertising. It's not about interruptive formats, it's more about the immersive experience. If you think about a Travis Scott concert on Fortnite, if you think of brand collaborations with Roblox and other things, I think it's going to be much more than that, much more than just a banner ad or a video ad or some rendered unit in a game. And I think that's really the powerful thing. But it's also, as I said, the waiting room to the metaverse, the first time where new formats are being experimented, which can then leave the realms of a kind of a single game, and you can earn maybe ad-funded credits or other things in the metaverse.
That's a good point on the metaverse. So still a lot of potential. I just met some guys from who are in the Web 3.0 space, which is quite interesting. And they said well, from a metaverse perspective, we're at 1%, right? There's still a huge way to go. And we will have the same multiverses popping up left and right, or there's going to be a long way to consolidate at some point where we will have, I've seen metaverse experiments with digital home ads where you engage. It's probably going to be crazy when we drag ourselves into that virtual reality and then we bring it back to the normal reality with what Apple and Google will try to do at some point. Any other channels you think are exciting besides CTV in-game? What else did we have? No, that's the metaverse. Anything else exciting in our industry in terms of what will change in the next this year or in the next 24 months? What do you think? I mean, CTV will establish itself more, of course. Pretty sure. I'm not gonna. That's what you probably wanted to say. No.
No, I was going to say, and I'm sure you were going to say something similar. But again, sustainability is going to be key, not just in advertising. The next 10 years will define where our planet will be, in the next 20 years, and how the future will look like for us from a, air perspective, clean air perspective, clean water perspective, geopolitical issues that are all related to climate change. So I think sustainability for our industry, for our advertisers, for our publishers, for our consumers is key. And we need to act fast. And I know everyone is, still, again, that's a paradigm shift as well, and late to the party, but better late than never. A lot of big advertisers and brands, and also big holdcos have set now their strategy. They set out their strategy, their goals for 2030. Often then they get postponed by 5 years, but still, we're doing something. And I think especially in our industry and in programmatic, there's a lot to be done. There's things that we're already doing that actually help with this. So SPO, supply path optimization. Yes. This needs to become supply chain optimization. Okay, who are you working with? Are they using, doing everything they can in terms of practices, in terms of, it goes from, which data centers are you using? Are they using green energy? To how many ad goals are you making? How many, SSPs and DSPs are you working with? And sort of that whole chain, that is going to be absolutely key in the next 2 to 5 years, I would say. And I think a lot of advertisers, and therefore media agencies, and therefore everyone else, will start looking at, okay, who am I working with in the supply chain? Is this the type of partner that is at the forefront? Do I want to be associated with this? Do I want to be working with them? Because consumers are going to be looking at that as well. So that's the most important thing, I think.
So, which absolutely makes sense, and I'm not going to say it's the new buzzword, which means we need to be more open and, another word we overuse in our industry, so many transparent, which players we work with, which the advertiser can demand, of course.
Absolutely, and I think transparency in that area will be very, very important. There's the greenwashing, that will become harder. Greenwashing, where you say, oh, I'm doing this or that, and actually it doesn't really make any difference down the line in terms of like a big fashion brand who says, oh, this is organic cotton or something, and people are like, oh, that must be sustainable, and actually it's the same environmental damage as the normal cotton. Or the fact that it's organic cotton and it's environmentally sustainable, but you're still selling at mass production with maybe not the most kosher supply chain in sort of developing countries. So all that, I think, becomes really, really important. And I think the difference at the moment is we look really much at, we've discussed, people, we've discussed profit and how can we, optimize our industry, how can we get the best outcomes, but then planet is coming into that as well. And that's going to be really, really key in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, I'm pretty sure I've seen already, companies, it's part of their pitch already when they talk about sustainability in terms of what they do to make it better, which is attractive to a lot of brands.
Of
we
course,
just want to talk about
when it's actually successful is when you can have those three pieces together, because then not only are you using it just to say, oh, we're doing well for the world, but it's also actually bringing you better results, and it's better for the planet, obviously, ultimately. So that's now trying to find that balance of how can we still keep growing. Economies need to always grow. We need to. We can't stand still. People need to move forward, but how can we do that in a sustainable way? So, things like circular economy is super important. Like, how can you get stuff back into the supply chain? How can you, from recycling in your office, which is pretty much what everyone is doing, but there's a lot of empty office space right now because a lot of people haven't been or are not going back to the office. How can we make sure that we're not wasting energy there by keeping the lights on? Recycling your hardware, working with, like I said, the data centers, all these kind of things, understanding what is your output and how can you reduce it.
Yeah. Daniel, what's your take?
I think this is a very important topic which was bubbling underneath the surface, but really came into full focus only a couple of months ago in the industry with an explosive launch of events which really put this topic center stage. And it's very important because in programmatic, we previously looked at mainly economic sustainability, supply chain optimization, as Julie mentioned, how to maximize yield for publishers, etc. But with economic sustainability also comes environmental sustainability. We saw first initiatives by publishers that banned ads from fossil fuel companies, which was a way to kind of stop greenwashing approaches and really do something. Consciously say, no, we don't want that kind of money. We're now seeing that move into the supply chain, as Julie said. And here we see ad calls, data centers, also this array of identity solutions, machine learning-based targeting models, all producing carbon emissions. How can we, coming back to the beginning of our conversation, ensure that we can both experiment, test, tinker with different approaches, but do that in a way that minimizes the carbon footprint.
Well, take learning out of this and optimize against that, right? Yeah.
And one, I think, the very last thing that's important here, we talked about Demexco and acronyms in our industry and how insular and for outsiders wildly exotic our industry is. When the topic of sustainability comes into the supply chain, programmatic acronyms suddenly become a CMO topic, because suddenly a CMO can say, the way I buy my ads, the way my ads are being delivered has a positive impact on my brand image. If you're selling electric cars, how can you justify having a carbon heavy ad supply chain? You can't. So these are becoming CMO topics. And I see this also as a huge hope for our industry, that it can break out of its, in a sense, technocratic bubble and have a really, really strong seat at the top executive table.
Yeah, I mean, to Julie's point, it's commoditized anyway, because it is already the CMO's language anyway, right? They need to understand it much better, because it's a huge part of their investment by now. I mean, and TV's spends us swapping over to CTV at some point, right?
But the education is so important here too, because there is a cost. I mean, people think, oh, digital advertising, that's better for the environment than, I don't know, newspapers or magazines, because it's an actual material that needs to be recycled, etc. But actually, there's a huge cost. So I think there's a lot of education to be done in terms of the type of ads. Does it have to be, a certain file? Can it be lighter so it's less energy used? CTV itself, if you watch, apparently there's some statistic about if you watch one Netflix show, it's just as bad as, I don't know, taking an airplane to Australia. I don't know. Just I can't remember what the statistic is. But so there is also, I think, in our industry, because it's digital, it feels very clean and very kind of, this is,
a very good point.
There's we don't have plastic, or, you don't feel or see the sort of waste that goes on.
All right, we almost finished. Any events in the next couple of weeks? I mean, conferences you're going to go to? I mean, the pressure on people meeting each other is immense. We go next week.
I'm going to be there as well.
Oh,
so I think we learned we're going to the same conference.
There's only one.
We have IAB Interact
there are two conferences
Madrid
next week, right? You're going to one in Germany as well.
Yes,
right.
And the one in London as
well. The one in London, yeah. Well,
then we got our IB conference, 25th May in Madrid.
I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, good to be back abroad. I think the circus continues, but for health reasons, one doesn't need to participate in every show.
No, you don't need to, but it's still good. What we need to teach these young kids, that learning cannot only be digital, right? Communication is a key fact to extend your mindset, how to survive in our industry. Which brings me to the end of our show. Thank you very much for coming, Julie. Thank you very much for coming, Danielle. We talked about the outlook of our industry. We talked about sustainability mainly, identity, how many solutions we have, that we have a consolidation there as well. And, it sounded, although we obviously had a dark side, which was not positioned as a dark side because we don't look at it from an industry perspective. There's a bright outlook for our industry. I still believe that we are in the coolest industry ever. Otherwise, I would have a restaurant by now and do pizza, but probably every day. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you, I guess, next week in Germany, and then in London, and then somewhere else. It's good to be friends with you, and see you soon again.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So, my friends, this is the end of the show. I hope you enjoyed it. I mean, it's these industry experts, who have shaped this industry for so many years with their opinions, and enjoyed the discussion. And we'll see you at the next show. Thank you.